Welcome to Independent Thought and Freedom. My guest today is Ms. Erica Williams-Connell, the daughter of the international intellectual and Trinidad and Tobago independence leader, Dr. Eric Williams. Although she likes to describe herself as a jack of all trades and master of some, Erica Williams-Connell has been doing yeoman's work for the past 20 years and more in keeping her father's valuable memory and legacy alive, mainly through the Eric Williams Memorial Collection, which was officially opened in 1998. Indeed, the Eric Williams Memorial Collection is included in UNESCO's Memory of the World Register. As with any great political figure, in addition to his achievements, Dr. Eric Williams and his legacy is not without controversy by any means. To discuss the legacy of her father and her relationship to him, I am very pleased to welcome Ms. Erica Williams-Connell. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kirk, and thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure for me to host you.
And let me just correct one thing you said.
Sure.
I am not doing this simply to memorialize my father and his quote-unquote legacy, because that suggests that we are a peon to everything that was positive about what he did and who he was. We are not. We are an academic undertaking. So it's the ebb and flow of the negative and the positive, the ebb and flow of opinions. That is what we are about. Right. To simply be a peon to his good qualities and the excellent things he did, both internationally and for the country, would be to propose him as a mere cardboard cutout of a man. And that is not what we are about. People are, all people, they do good things, they do things not so well. They are good people, sometimes they are, and I say this deliberately, and I'm sure it's going to come up later, evil people. Mm. So we are here to show both sides of the coin. Personally, I, as a daughter and also a student of Williams by now, I have absolutely no problem with how history will remember him. Mm-hmm. But it is history that will write the history.
That's right.
Not the politicians. Thank God.
I think that that's a very admirable and important stance to take, that this is not just hagiography and taking a good, honest look, because I mean that is a problem with a lot of political history, and in the region, you know, a lot of people just want to sort of lionize and romanticize and gloss over some of the very difficult and most important questions in the region. So
correct. Well, I'm not sure if that's only in the region. I think it's everywhere.
That's true. I suppose I'm very concerned about our region, so that's why I highlighted.
Right. But yeah. I have been although I'm not an academic myself, I have been well schooled over the last however many years, and before that, it's even though the EWMC, we say it for short, it's Eric Williams Memorial Collection, Research Library, Museum and Archives. Even though the EWMC was inaugurated in 1998, I've been working on this pretty much since 1981 when my father died.
Right.
So I have been well schooled in the parameters of academia and what I'm having a senior moment. What makes academia as opposed to a political, rally.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Now, well, let's start. There's so many places we can start from. What I'd like to start off by saying, or asking, exploring, is that your father was a young man when he came to power in Trinidad and Tobago. He was only 44 years old.
Correct.
Yet he was already quite accomplished.
Yes.
So, I mean, before he led the People's National Movement, which was his political party that he
formed it.
Yes.
Right.
What, just for the listeners, can you just go over, what had he done and at what ages? I think that's important.
Well, he started off in tranquility, I believe, at the age of 12, winning an exhibition. And, you know, from then on, he had success after success, failure as well. And he eventually graduated from Queen's Royal College. He won several prizes there. One of the most, I think, the most meaningful prizes was the Gerald Dorrie Prize.
And this was in Trinidad and Tobago, just to let the
Queen's Royal College. And the Gerald Dorrie Prize was given to the student, and both teachers and the student body had to vote for that person.
Right.
Okay. And I'm sure there were many parameters. I can't remember what they all are right now. I'm sure it was who would succeed, who was most accomplished, whether it was in sports or whatever. But the point is, it was not just the teachers.
Right.
It was the student body as well.
Mm-hmm. And he won the Island Scholarship.
Well, that was another thing. He won the Island. In those days, the British offered only one Island Scholarship a year in 3 different fields.
Right.
He won the Island Scholarship in, I guess, history, but only after failing it twice. He failed it twice, and that is something that is not, I think, not amplified enough.
That's correct. What age was he when he won?
You
remember?
Maybe when 1938. So he was. No. I'm thinking when the dissertation was.
That's correct.
Well, let's say he was like, I don't know, maybe 22, 23, maybe, because if let's say he graduated at 18, 19, he taught for a few years.
Right.
While he was trying for the scholarship, right? So let's say maybe.
Okay, I didn't realize he taught.
Yeah, he taught at QRC.
Mm-hmm. While waiting for the scholarship.
You know, you have young kids. What do you teach your kids? Yeah. Not always to be a success, but having failed, to then get up, dust yourself off, suck it up and try again. That's what we teach our kids.
Absolutely.
Not always to be, you know, perfect examples of success. So he did that. He failed not once, but twice. And prior to his 3rd sitting, he only had 3 tries, by the way. So this was his last and final, and his 3rd and final. And prior to the sitting, he had a football game. He was very accomplished in football and cricket. And he had a football game. He was captain of the QRC team, and I think it was football. And prior to that, he had a game. And his father didn't want him to go.
Right.
His father said, no, you're not going to go. You know, if something happens and you have the exam tomorrow, and of course he went. He went riding on the handlebars, as the people used to do in those days, of Halsey McShine's bicycle.
Okay.
Well, Halsey McShine, who's dead now, was his very good friend since those days. And that's how he went. Okay. And anyway, everything worked out okay. And he took the exam. The 3rd time, he passed it, and off he went to England with his father.
Okay.
To Oxford University.
Right.
And then, fast forward, he in his, I think it was in his BA, he came first. He got first in first class honors. It was the first time in God knows how many decades of St. Catherine's College, Oxford, that a student won. I mean, you know, have to forgive me for all these details, okay? I'm not reading his bio.
That's fine. That's fine. It's just
he got first in first class honors or whatever it was in history or whatever, and then he went on to do his PhD. And just another little anecdote is when he won the Island Scholarship. In those days, you could only, if you were going to be a success as a man, you could only be either a doctor or a lawyer. You had to study medicine or law. But he told his father he didn't want to study either. So when his father said to him, well, what do you want to study? He said the arts. Now, the father had a very pithy sense of repartee, which Eric Williams got, and which actually has come down through the ages. I think I have it, and my granddaughter has it. So when he told the father, I want to study the arts, the father said, arts, farts. And he didn't want that at all.
Yes.
And when finally he got his PhD, writing that incredible thesis about the economic aspect of the abolition of the British slave trade and slavery. Again, excuse me if I got some words wrong. He his father said, and he became, you know, Dr. Eric Williams, his father said, well, so you're a doctor after all, very sarcastically.
Yes, yes.
Anyway, so what he wrote that thesis.
And that was 38 he wrote it?
Yeah, I think it was 38.
So he would have been 27 years old.
Correct, correct. Yeah. Now, there's some people who like to say C.L.R. James wrote it for him. That's utter nonsense.
Yes.
And in fact, you can see C.L.R. James's writings where he said after he wrote the Black Jacobins, he wanted to write about this aspect of slavery. And he said that he didn't because he was absolutely certain that Eric Williams would do more than an admirable job.
Yes,
and C.L.R. James was his teacher.
That's right. And
you would well know that when you're doing a thesis, whatever thesis it is, whether it's a BA or a PhD thesis or a master's thesis, you have an advisor. You have an academic advisor.
Of course.
And they read it over. They might suggest something here. They might suggest something there. But that doesn't mean they wrote it for you. But there's some, you know, very
mischief makers.
I'm glad that you say it so politely. But anyway.
But I mean, because C.L.R. James was writing the Black Jacobins at the time, which was also a classic.
Precisely.
That was published in 38.
Precisely. So that was it. But he says so. C.L.R. James says so.
Yeah.
That this was an area he wanted to address, but he decided not to.
That's right.
Because he knew that Eric Williams, this protege, would do a very admirable job. And Eric
Can I
Williams
ask you something? 1938 is extremely important because that is when slavery was abolished practically. The legislation came in 1834, but you had apprenticeship for 4 years, and then 1838. But
you're talking 1938 and 1838.
So I'm saying it's 100 years.
100 years, yes. Yes.
Exactly.
If you look at not just the physical slavery, but if you look at what Haiti was forced to pay back to the French government.
Yes.
This went on well into the
20th
century.
Yeah.
So even though it was the slaves were emancipated in 1833 or whatever, then abolished in 1838 or whatever.
Yeah.
But even up to if I'm not mistaken, is the 1940s or maybe 1920s, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Haiti was still paying reparations, if you could believe that,
to
the French government.
I know, not many people know that, but that's
well, and it is astonishing, and people wonder why Haiti is the way it is today.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, since that time, it has been just a succession of, you know, corrupt governments and corrupt leaders and blah blah blah. And so there you go. Anyway,
but it's interesting that on the 100th anniversary of the abolition of slavery in the British Empire, Capitalism and Slavery, the thesis is written, and also the Black Jacobins.
Well, very interesting. Capitalism and Slavery wasn't written then; it was the
thesis. Right, which had a longer title.
The thesis became Capitalism and Slavery when the book was published in 1944 by the University of North Carolina Press. It has never been out of print. This year, it has been translated into English. Well, no, it's been translated into French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, Chinese, Japanese, and in the last 3 years or so, Korean and Turkish.
Amazing. And so when that was published, she was 33.
I'm sorry?
And when that was originally published as a book, he was 33 years old.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Because he was born in 1911. That's right. Yeah. And the thing about it is that this year is the 75th anniversary of Capitalism and Slavery.
That's right.
And we are now at the EWMC working on a conference with the University of Liverpool, being hosted by the Slave Trade Museum at the University of Liverpool, and the Thomas Jefferson Institute at the University of Virginia. And one of the organizers is from the University of Melbourne, Australia. on a slavery conference commemorating the 75th anniversary of capitalism and slavery. It's going to be held tentatively November 1 to 3, 2019 at the University of Liverpool.
And for people who don't know, I mean, that thesis shook up the historiography of the abolition movement.
It's still shaking it up.
That's correct.
Both in terms of the main thing that a lot of people focused on at the time was that the book, what he was saying, you know, the British were very good at saying they abolished slavery because of humanitarian reasons. And while that was partly true, he posited that it wasn't just about humanitarian reasons. It was for economic reasons.
Yeah, it was a shift from feudal slave-based capitalism to
because it
industrial wage-based capitalism.
It was no longer economically viable for the British to have all this human flesh that they had to cultivate in order to cultivate sugar, and they had to keep in good health and blah, 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 when machines could do that. So that was another theory of his, which is that the British, that slavery built the British Industrial Revolution. Mm-hmm. Slavery is what was responsible. The British Industrial Revolution was built on the backs of slaves. Mm-hmm. That was another one of his big theses in that book.
Yeah.
And it's still being
debated, contested,
hotly debated today. For example, there is no person today that can talk about slavery, really, at least in the Americas and Britain, without first dealing with capitalism and slavery.
Right.
I mean, you just have to go there first. Yes. You might end up somewhere else, but you have to go there first. And so that is why they are having this conference to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the book.
And to move forward, I mean, that wasn't the last of it at all, because then later he went to Howard University to lecture at Howard in Washington, D.C., the premier Black African-American university in the United States.
Yes.
About what year was that?
Well, he went in 1939 because he couldn't get a job at he couldn't get a fellowship at Oxford. He couldn't get a job in England, and he tried everywhere to get a job in India, Singapore, all over the place, and he couldn't get one. He got one in Howard, which at that time, as you said, was called the Negro Oxford.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? And so
and he wrote books like The Negro in the Caribbean, and Education in the Caribbean. John Dewey had written the foreword.
That's right. Yeah.
That book.
There were lots and lots of people, scholars at Howard, who are very famous Black scholars, and at the time, as I said, it was called the Negro Oxford. Yeah. But one of the things I wanted to just mention to you, there is a wonderful quotation of Eric Williams that was that he said in 1962. He had a speech to West Indian students, and this is about his belief and, as far as he was concerned, the proof that he offered in Capitalism and Slavery about how the British Industrial Revolution was built on the backs of slaves. For example, every departing colony of Britain, except India and Pakistan at the time, were offered something called the Golden Handshake. The reason why India and Pakistan were not is because they didn't offer it them at all.
Right.
So, subsequent to India and Pakistan achieving their independence, they began to offer this Golden Handshake, the British, to departing colonies. And every single post-colonial leader accepted it, except Eric Williams. Mm-hmm. Now, they had a caveat. We're going to give you this aid, however much money it was, I don't remember. But you have to use that money to buy British goods.
Right.
Okay? So there were proscriptions to what you could do with the money.
Mm-hmm.
So in November 1962, at the London School of Economics, he gave a speech to West Indian students, and this is what he said, this is one of the quotes I absolutely love. He says, "The West Indies are in the position of an orange. The British have sucked it dry, and their sole concern today is that they should not slip and get damaged on the peel. The offer is quite unacceptable, and we would prefer not to have it. It amounted to aid to Britain rather than to Trinidad. I do not propose to accept any concept of the Commonwealth, which means common wealth for Britain and common poverty for us."
Yeah.
How fabulous is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's typical Eric Williams.
Typical Eric Williams.
Yeah, yeah. Because
Absolutely.
I mean, as you know, I did my PhD with Paul Sutton, who worked with your father, and he had given me all his speeches while I was doing my own PhD. And I was Wilberforce Scholar at the University of Hull, and William Wilberforce was the MP for Hull, who piloted the abolition of slavery bill in 1834, and for decades before that as well. So I really have a great appreciation.
And so he was, and this, by the way, this fight went on for a year.
Mm-hmm.
The British trying to get him to accept it, and him saying no. What he basically said is, "You can't give us money. You owe us money.
Right.
And if you give us money, you can't tell us what to use it for. You owe us money, because it was our labor that built your revolution, your industrial revolution."
And there are all sorts of other profits made. Like I actually had to make the point to the Boston Globe last month about this. They were talking about the LNG in Trinidad and Tobago, and they were talking about Trinidad and Tobago, some faraway island, and some remote place or something. And the whole circular trade, from the production of molasses to the distilleries in Boston, and then they would make the rum, and with the British manufacturers, they'd go to West Africa, purchase slaves with that, bring it back to the West Indies to produce more molasses, and make this triangular trade.
Yeah. Yeah.
And every leg of that journey was a profit, eh?
Right, of course.
Every leg.
That's why it was called the triangular trade, right?
Yes. And it was all of those things as well. So not only in the labor of the slaves, but the whole system of trade, and because at each point of trade there were profits. At each journey of the ship, there were profits, and immense profits made.
Yes, Colin Palmer, former Princeton University professor, wrote this wonderful book on called Eric Williams and the Making of the Modern Caribbean. And in the chapter about the Golden Handshake, he basically says that the original letter from Eric Williams, which stated that he was not going to have this, he did not want it, wasn't going to have it, and by the way, you are impertinent to us to suggest that if we do accept it. First of all, he said the amount of money was not enough. That's what he said. Then he said, "You can't tell us what to use it for, because we helped to build your industrial revolution." So Colin Palmer says that the letter in which he wrote all of this landed like a bomb in 10 Downing Street.
Mm-hmm.
And subsequent to that, for 1 year, he fought with the British. And for example, he would come up for, let's say, a Commonwealth conference, and they would have a meeting at 10 Downing Street, whoever was the Prime Minister at the time, probably Macmillan, and they would have his books spread out on the conference table to act as though he had read them, to try to kind of soft soap him, like people do to our esteemed leader where I live now. Always, caressing his goddamn ego. This is what they tried to do to Eric Williams. Well, it didn't work. Right. Because he still went on with the fight. The fight lasted for 1 year, and eventually he did have to accept it.
Right.
Better something than nothing.
Yeah.
He did have to accept it, but he gave them a good run for their money.
Now, even before the prime ministership again, and the premiership, and even chief minister, so he was with the Caribbean Commission. right?
Yes, while he was at Howard, correct.
Right.
Correct.
And just briefly, can you tell us about the Caribbean Commission? That was set up during World War II, I believe.
Right. By the US, the UK, the Netherlands, and France.
Right.
And it was supposed to, I think it was supposed to promote, you know, economic interests or something in the Caribbean, you know, that, something like that.
Yes.
And so he was variously the research development officer, there's another name for it, and so on. And then that's just while he was at Howard.
Right.
And I guess he kept getting, you know, sort of leaves of absence, and eventually he had to give up the professorship at Howard. And he went back to Trinidad, and that's where he was with the Caribbean Commission, like full time.
Right.
And then, of course, he fell out with them.
Yeah, and there was I mean,
they did not like his writings.
And he was famous in Trinidad for driving a particular car. I can't remember when he was.
Buick Dynaflow.
That's right.
That car was like his child.
Yeah.
Buick Dynaflow that I got my fingers squeezed in. It was a convertible. In fact, when Princess Margaret came to, was one of the, you know, really kind of few big cars in Trinidad. When Princess Margaret visited, I think in the 50s, they didn't have a suitable car, so they asked to borrow his.
Right.
So
that was before he entered politics.
Yes.
Right.
Oh yes. Oh yes. And so, and then he, you know, he continued writing, and he continued having. He was obviously a very opinionated man.
And not only that, I want to also stress. I mean, at the Caribbean Commission, I mean, I know of his work there, and I mean, he would invite people like Arthur Lewis, who later won the Nobel Prize in Economics, to write. And he collaborated with Munoz Marin
in Puerto Rico, absolutely.
Correct.
And
yeah.
you know, I think all the time nowadays of Hurricane Maria and Puerto Rico, and the fact that these U.S. citizens were treated, I mean, to say they were treated shabbily is the understatement of the century.
Yeah.
And now to find that maybe some monies that were earmarked for their recovery might be spent to build some blasted wall is just unbelievable. So, you know, I sometimes wonder, I mean, Munoz Marin, who of course advocated the independence of Puerto Rico, must be turning in his grave.
I mean, so here, I mean, so this was in the 19th, so he was in his early 40s, late 30s, and he has this incredible track record behind him.
Well, he also did, at Howard, he also put on this series of lectures for the economic aspects of the Caribbean. And he would invite all these, you know, very, very well-known scholars, and as you said, Arthur Lewis and Munoz Marin, and they would, or I don't know if Munoz Marin actually went to that, but he would put on these lectures, I think annually, and it would always had like the governor of some territory might, you know, Caribbean territory might come and open it, and so on. So he always had not only did he also, let me just say, not only did he teach at Howard, but he also had this series of lectures in terms of educating people at Howard, and the students, of course, about the Caribbean and its importance in world affairs, even from way back when. And he also, having another senior moment, just forgot what I was going to say. I'll remember it in a minute.
Okay, that's. I'm sure we'll jog your memory as you talk, because one point I want to sort of reflect on with this, look at all his achievements as, you know, as a young man, and then, you know, in his 20s and his 30s and up to his 40s before he became prime minister. So prime minister wasn't his first big achievement.
No, and let me cut in right there. I just remembered.
Yes.
At Howard, he edited the first ever social sciences textbook, 3 volumes, called The Development of Civilization.
I didn't know.
3 volumes are in the EWMC, first ever, and the pages are typewritten.
Right. Oh, I wasn't aware of that fact. Yes. I definitely need to check that out. But so his great achievements by the age of 44, and then later on to lead the country into independence, I mean, it's quite remarkable, I think. But while he is an exceptional person, by no means was that ordinary. I do think that when I reflect on the past and today, I think it does say something about today's society, because you don't see.
It definitely does. There's a door you're talking, you're preaching to the choir. Of course it does. You do not see that. Well, to begin with, just from my, piddling little education, which was by no means, I mean, I didn't go to university, decidedly so, I deliberately so. But I had an excellent high school education going to A levels, even though I failed those miserably. But excellent. When I look today at what they're teaching high schoolers even, the kind of education that I had, far less him, was so, I mean,
far in advance.
Out of the ballpark. Out of the ballpark. I mean, today in America, of course, you have kids who are leaving school, and, that's the age-old, adage. They don't know how to read, they can't read a map, it's unbelievable.
And I think, men in particular, they have been infantilized by education. I think men are like, whereas, in your father's day, in my father's day.
How do you say, what do you mean by that?
I'll tell you, in my, let's say even in my father's day, let alone your father's day, a 25-year-old was a full-grown man. My father had 2 children, wife, a house, and and he was a man. A 25-year-old was a man. Today, a 25-year-old is a dependent, right? Officially, right? In the Affordable Care Act, up to 26.
Well, there should be, because the brain does not. I mean, since the study of MRI, since the mapping of the brain via MRIs, the brain does not develop fully until the age of 25. Now, I am wondering if that has changed over the ages, because you can't tell me that Eric Williams' brain was not developed before the age of 25, but there are certainly the children of today, their brain is definitely sometimes not even after 25.
That's what I mean
I hear what you're saying.
By infantilized. We have 30-year-old children, and in fact, the longer men spend in school doing their PhDs and graduate, the more they extend their childhood and adolescence. And they come out of university at 30 years old and they've never had a job. They have no responsibility.
There's some people who are just perpetual students. I agree. I don't know. It is just, I think that civilization has definitely dumbed down. There is no question to me about that.
And the responsibilities, the goals, accomplishments, the achievements have lessened. I mean,
well, you know why? Well, a few years ago, they were talking about high schoolers would rather read the movie script of Little Women than the book itself.
Right.
You know why that is? Because why things have dumbed down? Because we have too much. In those days, they had nothing. You had to pull yourself up by your damn bootstraps. Otherwise, you had nothing. The kids today, you have young kids. I have a young granddaughter living with me. They have too much.
I think it's almost a purposeful distraction in my view. And by distracting people so much, they lose focus. And I think that's a huge problem in the modern world. But
by contrast, let me just say one other thing. I know we've sort of gotten off the topic, but it's all relevant. By contrast, my granddaughter goes to a public school in America, and they are affiliated with Cambridge University International School. Wonderful. But some of the stuff that she has to do, especially the math, in kindergarten, they're talking about vertices. I have a real problem with that. Oh God, call it a corner, vertex, a corner, vertices, corners, okay? And what the hell is the cumulative or distributive properties of mathematics? Come on. She comes home with homework and she says, Gani, I have to do the commutative properties of math. I said, what the hell is that? I don't know what that is. So I think they've gone from, I don't know, one extreme to the other.
And
so you're going to tell me a 5-year-old has to learn about a vertex?
And they've missed the core in both ways.
Probably.
They've missed the essence by by both of you. But
Yeah.
I'll tell you how your father motivated me personally, because I have looked up to your father as a model. Like publishing, the thesis as a book, I always had him in mind when I was doing that, and, completing the thesis young, I sort of would look at that and sort of measure myself against him, and, attempting to make intellectual breakthroughs and applying them to real life, being a politically active intellectual and things that I've always admired and been amazed at, like when he and Dom Basil Matthews in 1955 in Trinidad, they had a public debate on Aristotle and
Well,
education.
again, here
And
we are talking about
thousands of people,
yeah, but
thousands of people came.
all of the University of Woodford Square lectures, and that brings me to the present, where the EWMC is supposed to be moving, hopefully, from its premises at the UWI Library into the old Central Library building at Knox Street,
Right,
which is opposite Woodford Square. And it's a beautiful segue, because that's where he began the public lectures, which became so popular, 20,000 people, that they had to move to Woodford Square, right opposite. And therefore, he dubbed that the University of Woodford Square. So again, this is exactly what you said. The debate between him and Dom Basil Matthews and the University of Woodford Square lectures, sometimes 20,000 people, 10,000 people, 15,000 people. Where are those people now?
Exactly.
Nobody's coming to listen to any lecture.
That's
You kidding
correct.
me? They're looking at the Kardashians. That's their lecture circuit.
And your father always treated the electorate as sophisticated, even when they had little formal education.
Correct.
Never talked down to people by changing the way he spoke.
No.
And then he also lived a very stoic life. So he did not become involved in the drunkenness and bacchanalia of carnival. So he didn't feel he had to patronize them and pretend, pretend to be what he wasn't. I've always I admired him for showing that side as also being authentically Trinidadian.
Well, listen to what he said about that. Exactly what you said. He did use to play carnival, huh? He did. Okay. Well, yes, a few times.
Right.
But I know what you're saying. So, and here's what he said about that. Sort of, God knows. I think if he saw what passes for carnival today, he always understood that carnival was cultural, or ought to be cultural.
Right.
But he also understood the psyche of the West Indian, the character of the West Indian, and particularly this. Look, he said he wrote this in Inward Hunger, in 1962 or something. And look at this. We're talking 40-something years later, and exactly what he said then is what is happening now. Finally, the entire West Indian tradition is anti-intellectual. People's lives are bounded by the narrow materialistic considerations of gambling or chasing after women or men, as the case may be, or just plain gluttony and imbibing. Add to that the movies and the radio, and in modern days, the equally pernicious television, and fit in somewhere in this schedule sleeping and working or making pretense of working, and the normal individual's day is complete. Cricket and football, a sports meeting, the races, carnival, and the normal year is complete. A head of government cannot be limited to such narrow and materialistic considerations. So I read deliberately, in silent protest, against the bastardization of so-called West Indian intellectualism.
Exactly. Yes, I know that quote well, because that is one of the things that also inspired me. And one thing he would say, I believe it was in the British Historians in the West Indies, in the preface, he mentioned in passing, but he has this sharp wit, where he talked about people would ask him where he gets the time to write these books as the head of a country, and he would say, well, between Christmas and Carnival in Trinidad and Tobago, nothing happens, and that's when he shuts himself off and he writes his work. Hugh Thomas, who wrote the slave trade book from the UK, from Oxford, he recounts that in his preface too, when he met Williams in '69 at a conference.
Who did you say?
Hugh Thomas.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I think so.
Yes,
I think so.
in the preface, he recounts that same thing, how Williams was joking at the dinner table. How
Yes, I have. We have that book at the EWMC because I remember it was reviewed in the New York Times Book Review, I believe. Yeah.
yeah,
What,
that was
what
published in the 90s, I believe, that book, or the 2000s. I can't around then.
on slavery?
Yes, the slave trade.
On
It's a
slavery.
major
Yes, I'm
book.
sure we. Yes, yes, yes. I know
Yes,
this.
yes.
I know this for a fact. Yeah.
And I mean,
He
and
did.
me, when I wrote my book too, I was writing it during that period. And on Carnival itself, I was actually
Mhm.
working with Lloyd Best at the time. And on in Carnival Monday and Tuesday, and I was in office, finishing up my book for publication. And Lloyd Best had come in the office, and he was so surprised to see me
Mhm.
because everybody is, fetting and whatnot.
Yeah.
He came in to do work as well, and I mentioned to him, this is, we are really children of Eric Williams.
Well,
we
I'm not sure. I'm not sure he would have agreed with that, but
no
who
we
knows?
yes, we always had a debate about that. I know that Lloyd loved Eric Williams, and that's why he had such passionate disagreement. It's
Well, I think loved might be too strong a word, but anyway, no, I hear what you're saying.
yeah, deep down inside, no, it's almost like a father-son relationship. It was supposed to be James to Williams to Best. That's what it was supposed to be, but something happened. So
Yeah, right, right.
yes, but yeah, and although I too am a great critic of your father politically, but I also think at the same time that he thought of every important question that still faces Trinidad and Tobago, its position in the community of nations, in world events and history, and he addressed them very deeply and fundamentally. He always asked the right questions, and even if you disagree with many of his answers,
Well, this is the thing. Reasonable. So the thing we're having in the United States now, and I bring the United States into almost everything I do because I eat, breathe, and sleep the politics that's going on in here now.
right.
But that's the thing. Reasonable people can have policy disagreements. Sure, no problem. Yes. Of course, that's what makes for interesting debate.
That's right. That's right. Now, I want to reflect a little bit about life with your father, your life with your father, and in Trinidad. I was looking at some of the interviews you've done before, and you had mentioned when you were in Trinidad, children were mean to you.
Yes.
At school.
Yes.
Was this before independence you're talking about, or after?
Yeah. This was in primary school.
So this is before
before independence. Yes, absolutely.
So
yes.
before, but was the PNM around, and was it part of the politics?
Yeah, this was like around 1958, and he won power in 1956.
So so it was tied to the politics, was it? The children.
I don't know if it was
tied.
Not sure? No. I wouldn't go to that extent. I really, certainly my recollection of it had nothing to say with, no, I don't know if it was tied to the politics. I could never say that.
Right.
I would say it's just tied to kids being kids.
Okay.
So
okay.
It happens all the time.
All right. So the meanness to you wasn't because of your father.
It was bullying, okay? But the bullying in those days that we experienced, I'm going to be 68 in a month. Right. The bullying in those days that we experienced was not life or death bullying.
Right.
It was just kids being mean and, and I experienced the bullying when I went to school in England too in 1962. Right. So I experienced it in Trinidad and I experienced it in England.
Because
I went to boarding school.
You had asked your father to send you away, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. I had assumed it was related to the sort of intensity of the political environment. Well,
Ken Boodoo, who also wrote a book on EW based on oral histories, he never could accept the fact that it was I. He kept saying, "Oh yeah, he wanted to send you away." That's not true at all. I asked. I met some kids. He would take me to Tobago every summer, and there were in Tobago at the Crown Point Hotel, which was, some of my dearest memories. there would be kids there home from the, either from home from school, wherever they went to school, whether it was Trinidad or England or whatever. And I met some girls there, the Gittins girls,
Okay.
Carol and Susan, Cyril Gittins' children. And Carol was already at boarding school, and Susan was going that year. And I got very friendly with them, and I said, and they kept, Carol kept saying, why don't you try to come and so on? And I asked him, and I went. 7 worst years of my life.
Okay. So
oh my God.
Did you regret it then?
No, I don't.
Okay, you don't.
No.
Right.
7 worst years of my life.
But
however, no, I shouldn't say 7 worst years. 7 horrible years in my life. But they were the best thing that ever happened to me.
Why?
Well, my granddaughter, we've had 2 weeks of, my granddaughter and my daughter live with me. So since my husband died. Anyway, so they just went back to school this week. So my granddaughters had a little bit of an adjustment. And I said, well, you know what happens? What's going to happen? Next year, Christmas, 2 weeks is too long for you. You need 1 week holiday, and 1 week you're getting your tail put in camp, because apparently you can't adjust to coming back to school. So at the beginning, she said, I don't want to go to school and all that. I said, well, I tell her, I relate to my experience. I said, well, you know how we used to be. You are so lucky that you can come home after school. I said, imagine I lived there. And I said, you remember, let me tell you what we used to sing when we only had like a week, or coming down to the final weeks or whatever of school before holidays. And I just the other day I sang it. I said, we used to say, 3 more days of school, 3 more days of sorrow, 3 more days of this old dump, and we'll be home tomorrow. I said, so let me tell you something, little girl. I said, you better straighten yourself out, because you have many, many, many more years of school to go through. I said, and we all did it. Listen to the song I used to sing. We all had to go through it. We all hated it, but somehow we came out okay on the other side. Right. I said, so you might as well fix your face, because it ain't going away.
Okay. So, I thought that perhaps you might have shunned politics because of that experience in school, but it's not related.
Well, no, I shunned politics because I don't like attention.
Okay.
I never have liked attention, and if you are going to put yourself out there, then you attract all the attention. I don't like the attention in Trinidad. I remember years, my late aunt, who's just died, used to have the most broken down Volkswagen you could ever think of. And for years after my father died, she would let me use it in Trinidad. I would have on a visor. I would do everything possible short of actual disguise as Batgirl or something.
Yes.
To go in that car and have nobody recognize me. But Trinidad is a land of macos.
Right.
You stop at a traffic light. Oh God, look, she there. There was no way, even in that broken down old Volkswagen with the visor on. There's no way.
And with your father being who he was, I mean, it was.
No, this is after he died. Years after he died.
Okay.
There was no way that I could hide my face. Now, as the years have gone by, I've gotten older. It's been 30-something years since he's died. I could usually go out, and most people don't recognize, especially young people don't.
Right.
But the older ones do, and I could not stand that kind of attention. The attention that I would attract. And yes, it did have something to do with politics, because after he became premier and he won the election in 1956, well, I was driven to school by a chauffeur in his old black Vauxhall, and no other kids were. I mean, it's just just awful that way.
So how did that feel for you, coming in a chauffeur, the Vauxhall, a chauffeur-driven Vauxhall? Did people used to tease you about that? Children.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That was all part of it.
Yeah.
So that was like, for example, in primary school at Bishop's, when I was like maybe 7 or 8. The teachers used to feel sorry for me because my mother had died, and they knew that my father was probably didn't have a lot of time to be with me, and I was in a goldfish school. So we used to have a homeroom teacher called Miss Gray. She was English, lovely lady, and the teachers used to kind of try to favor me a little bit because of the situation.
Yeah.
And one day Miss Gray was late. I'm talking about, I was about 8 and in Trinidad at Bishop. Miss Gray was late for school. And all the children got up from their desks and sang Teacher's Pet. I want to be Teacher's Pet. Now, I looked up the other day, I looked up the song to see when that came out. It was 1958. So I was there, I was 7. Kids might, I see it now with my granddaughter, kids do not want to be focused upon.
Yes.
They want to, at some point, they almost want to melt into the woodwork.
Right. Now,
and that's how I was, and that's how I have been for most of my life. As I've gotten older, I've come out of that, and I'm very assertive. You know, if I, you can't say that if I gave a speech to 20,000 people in 1991 in St. James that I was a shrinking violet. Obviously not.
Yes.
But I still don't like attention. And I remember the old opposition politician Lionel Sukaran. And again, opposition politics were very different in those days as they are completely to now, whether it's here or in the United States. Opposition politicians, they respected Eric Williams, a lot of them. They did. And there was no animosity. They were reasonable people taking different policy positions. So Suki saw me, I used to call him Suki. Suki saw me grow up from the age of 5. And so years and years later, after my father died and Suki was still alive, he would always, every time I got to Trinidad, he would always invite me to lunch in San Fernando with his 1,000,001 children, daughters, and so on. And I would say, Suki, I don't like driving all that way, you know, by myself. Can you send a car for me? So he said, sure. Well, I was staying at my aunt in Ellerslie Park. And Suki one day sent this Rolls Royce. And I'm getting ready. This is one day. I'm getting ready. And she says, Erica, there's a Rolls Royce outside. She used to live at the end of an alley. Right. There's a Rolls Royce outside. I said, you've got to be joking. Are you serious? You can't be serious. I go out and there's this blasted Rolls Royce. Third, I spent the entire time from Port of Spain to San Fernando on the floor of the Rolls Royce, because you can see people looking in, everywhere in this Rolls Royce, right? This driving by, they're looking and, you know, peering in. I spent the entire time on the floor. When I got to San Fernando, I said, Suki, never, ever do that to me again. I said, if you ever have to send a car for me, send a Corolla. Never do that to me again. I said, I'm like wrapped up like a pretzel sitting on this floor from Port of Spain to San Fernando, so nobody would see me. It's embarrassing.
There's a few interesting things about that. One is that Lionel Sukaran's grandson is now the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago.
Correct.
And he's and your father used to make a statement when dealing with the opposition and the title, the initials with the DLP. He used to say DLP fathers would have PNM sons. Right?
I didn't know that one.
Yes.
Oh, really? Oh,
yes.
There you go. There you go.
And so there's
and as always.
Exactly. End of part 1. That's all for Independent Thought and Freedom this week. Please join us again next week. And in the meanwhile, make sure you subscribe, leave me a rating, like, and share this podcast with your friends. Thanks, and bye for now.